Today's story is so many things. It's raw and emotional. It's also inspirational and hopeful. Most importantly, though, it's a brave and vulnerable story. Kelley's story is why I started this podcast. To share people's stories, the good and bad, to show that through hard times and the good times too, there is so much growth and learning, which propels us into better versions of ourselves. I met today's guest, Kelley Farrel, in a Facebook group that I'm in called Find a Guest, Be a Guest. And it's essentially a space for podcasters to either find guests for their own shows or pitch themselves to be on other shows. So one day I was playing around in this group, trying to find some new guests for the show, and Kelley's name popped up. She introduced herself and gave a little background, but the phrase that stood out to me was this, and I'm paraphrasing here. She said, "I was in a psychologically abusive marriage. My husband kidnapped our children. I was homeless on the streets of Chicago. But today, I am making 6 figures as a nanny." Okay, say what? After chatting with Kelley on a phone call before we recorded this episode, I quickly came to realize that Kelley's story was one of strength, resilience, and hope. One of the biggest messages here is it is never too late to change the course of your life. One of my favorite quotes from this episode is, quote, "You have to go through the hard thing to get to the good thing," end quote. Kelley's story shows you what it means to be brave and vulnerable while constantly persevering towards a better life. Oh man, you guys, need I say more? This is a dang good episode, and I am so grateful and happy you are here right now to hear it. You're listening to the Cultivating Curiosity podcast, where everyone has a story to share. This is the... State your name and what you do.
I'm Kelley Farrel, and I am a professional wife's wife.
Where did you grow up, Kelley? Paint a picture for me of the town you grew up in and the neighborhood you grew up in. What was it like?
Well, I actually moved around a lot. I started off in California, and then when I was in kindergarten, moved to Chicago, and then moved all around the suburbs. Eventually moved downstate. My father was in sales, so wherever his territory changed to, that's where we went. But for the most part, I'm an Illinois girl.
What was your family life growing up?
Very interesting. When I was younger, my biological father, my mother's first husband, was actually a wild animal trainer, specifically an elephant herd master. Um, and they were young. It was the 60s. It's just how life was back then. And and then when they went through their divorce, my mom moved to Illinois and then sent for me, and ended up meeting a wonderful man who I actually introduced her to when I was 6 years old. And he was a pharmaceutical sales rep. It was a complete 180-degree flip. And I ended up being raised in a fairly privileged lifestyle.
How did you introduce your mom at the age of 6 to her future husband?
Well, like I said, she was a hippie. She was young. We had just moved halfway across the country, and we lived in an apartment complex. Now, back then, kids could kind of run around and do what they wanted, and everybody sort of looked out for everybody else. And that's how it was in 1970, I believe it was 71, something like that. And my dad, I call him my dad now, he lived next door. He had just graduated from college, and he had 3 college buddies. They were all roommates. And my mom, had me and my little brother, and we would run around in the hallways. And of course, we met these college boys we thought were so cool when I was 6 years old, and they would let me come jump on their furniture. And this one guy in particular would impress me by juggling crazy things. And his name was Jim, and we called him Jimmy. And we would always ask if we could go to Jimmy's house to play. And my
Oh.
mom didn't know he was a college boy. She thought
Mm-hmm.
he was my age. And one day we asked if Jimmy could come over for lunch. And she said, well, sure, have
Oh
Jimmy come
my gosh, that's so
over.
funny.
So yeah, and so they met, and I believe it was November, December of that year. And he came over and I guess, was a little nervous. He did his juggling act for her and dropped 3 jars of mustard on our kitchen floor.
Oh, that's
And
hilarious.
months later, they were married. True story.
Wow, that's really cool. I love hearing stories like that.
Yeah, they're celebrating their 50th anniversary next year.
That's
Oh,
amazing. Oh, and it's all because of you, Kelley.
yeah, it was all me.
It was all you, girl. Take the credit.
Maybe not, but all right.
I love
But
that.
yeah, thank you.
That's a great story. Now, Kelley, what kind of characteristics would you use to describe yourself as a little girl and as a child growing up?
Well, the adjectives I would use would probably be pretty different from how other people would describe me. I'll put that out there right now. I felt that I was very shy and very awkward and talented at certain things and really backward at other things. Um, but if you asked my friends, they would all say I was the life of the party and I was always doing something fun and creative and interesting, which is it's just so funny to me because that's not how I saw myself.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about your favorite childhood memory.
Oh my goodness, my favorite one. Um, wow. I, I couldn't even really pick out one, and that sounds so silly, but I had such a crazy life. It's really hard for me to nail down just one memory. We traveled in the United States. We traveled a lot. We did things together a lot. Um, I think one of my favorite memories would probably be, and this won't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but I started playing flute when I was 9 years old, and I ended up having a real talent for it. And there is a performance arts center in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, the University of Illinois. It's called the Krannert Center for Performing Arts, and it's quite a big deal. You know, international musicians play there, and it's people come from miles around. And I gave my first solo performance there when I was 11 years old, and it was pretty
Wow,
cool.
that's a great
Yeah,
memory. I mean, what an accomplished feeling being so
it really
young.
was. It
Yeah,
was.
that's so
I think
cool.
that would be the one if
So
I had to
what
pick.
what were your dreams growing up? Was it related around music?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. I wanted to be a scientist and a world famous musician.
I love it. Keeping your options open.
Absolutely, from a very young age. Yes.
That's so great. So, I want to transition now into your early life, specifically getting married. So,
Okay.
how old were you when you met your husband?
Oh gosh. 18.
Wow, young. Okay. How did you guys meet?
We met in college. He was in a fraternity, and I was a little sister in his fraternity.
That's great. That's fun. So what was your relationship like in the beginning with your husband? Like what was it about him that drew you to him and attracted you to him in the beginning?
He was a nice guy. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
he, yeah, he was just he was nice. He was friendly. He was not aggressive. Um, and kind of anything I wanted, he just sort of was like, sure, okay, let's do
Hmm.
that.
I mean, that's nice to hear, right?
It,
Anything
it
you
was.
want.
Well, yeah, and I have to back up a little bit. I grew up in a very strict household, believe it or not. And when I was in high school, I mean, I pretty much had to ask for, if I wanted to turn on the TV, if I wanted to go anywhere, I had to ask.
Hmm.
I don't think that that was necessarily completely uncommon, but it wasn't, some people raise their eyebrows, some say, yeah, okay, yeah. So
Hmm.
I get the impression I'm not the only one who grew up that way back
Yeah.
then. So
Yeah, no. So this was different for you. You didn't,
completely.
yeah.
Yeah. Somebody saying, "What do you want to do?" was so new for me,
Hmm.
and then being relaxed enough to wait for an answer. It was very yeah, it was new.
Okay.
And I liked it.
Yeah, of course. Who wouldn't?
Right.
Now, so how long did you guys date before you decided, okay, let's get married?
Well, we didn't decide let's get married.
Hmm. Okay.
Uh, so uh, my we were dating and we were doing what college kids do,
Mm-hmm.
and I ended up getting pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's a lot more to the story. I don't want to bore you with the whole details, but I ended up getting pregnant. I didn't tell anybody, and I decided I was giving the baby up for adoption. And um, and through a long, twisted, series of events, my parents found out and convinced me to keep the baby. And it was very shortly before the baby was due. And my boyfriend and I, my parents called his mom, and everybody had a big powwow, and they all decided that we were going to get married. And-
Hmm.
right. And I had actually been thinking in my 19-year-old wisdom about how to break up with my boyfriend,
Hmm.
and I was super passive aggressive when I was younger. I was not at all direct, and I never just said, I don't want to do this, and I'm not doing this. I just, people pleaser, passive aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
the program. And all the while in the back of my head, I'm thinking, how can I get out of this? Right. And so my 19-year-old solution was to get into a place where I was nowhere near any of the adult figures in my life. And then I would just break up and move on with my life, and and everybody would just go along with the show. And excuse me, my so we went back to our college town, and again, I'm leaving out a lot of details, but I'm thinking about, how am I going to pick up with this guy? What am I going to do? And my mom would call me every weekend and say, and by now the baby's been born, right? And I love him to pieces. He's my son. He's 35 now. I know, right? But anyway, so uh, thinking about how am I going to break up with my boyfriend, and my mom would call me and say, "What are you doing next weekend? You should get married." And I would always have an excuse. And and then one day she got smart and she called me and had a really nice chat with me and said, "What are you doing next weekend?" And I said, "Oh, nothing. What are you thinking about doing?" She's like, "You're getting married."
Oh, wow.
So my grandfather is a judge, my uncle's a photographer, and uh, she piled everybody into a car, no joke, and had my grandpa fast track the paperwork for our marriage certificate, and literally came down like 3 days later and put on a last minute wedding right there.
Wow. Was the
Yeah.
wedding in your living room or your backyard?
It was in the formal living room at the fraternity.
Oh my goodness.
It was awful. I
Wow.
didn't want to do it. I procrastinated. I ended up being like an hour and a half late to my own wedding.
Hmm.
And I came in, they'd tapped a keg, and I will never forget this as long as I live. All the fraternity brothers had like those plastic solo cups,
Oh
and they made like an
no.
arch, and here comes the bride.
Oh my God. What a
Oh,
wedding.
oh
That is
no.
truly one for the books, Kelley.
It It was no. Anyway, so
Wow.
that's our beginning. Um,
But I mean, your gut never lies, right? You felt from the very beginning, I don't want to marry this man.
correct,
You
correct.
knew.
I did know. So, yeah, so that was it. And yeah, it was just downhill from there.
Yeah, Kelley, why don't you elaborate a little bit on that next part of the journey for us? Because you're
Sure.
open, and from the very beginning with me, you've been very open about your abusive relationship with your husband.
Right.
When did it start becoming abusive? What happened?
Well, so I have to add a little qualifier that I don't think we talked about earlier.
Hmm.
I have two husbands. So this was my first husband. And
Okay.
there was a lot of degradation that was happening, and things like that, um, but not to the extent that the husband that we spoke about. That was
Mm.
a whole other story that's probably more relevant to our conversation. But I'll walk you through this one quickly, and then
Okay.
um, what happens with a lot of people when they're in abusive situations, abusive relationships, is your head really gets turned around, and you don't know what is what's the right step to take in this situation, what that's drawing good boundary lines, that's keeping me safe, that's keeping my loved one safe. It's really hard to determine what to do because you have this person telling you that you're stupid and that you don't know what to do, and so you tend to doubt yourself through the whole process. So as as it was with the husband that we discussed, so it was with my first husband, but not to that extent. I think he was younger and didn't have the tools in his toolkit yet, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, he would definitely degrade me and say, you're so stupid, you can't cook, you can't do this. Meanwhile, I was working, mind you, two full-time jobs while he
Mm-hmm.
was going to school. And for me, the final straw was we had gone to a bank to figure out a budget because I just wasn't making ends meet as much as I was working. And we went in and actually met with the bank president, and he sat us down and said, show us your paperwork. And I showed him my receipts or my paycheck stubs for my two jobs. And my husband at the time had nothing to show. And the bank president was, what do you mean you don't have an income? And he said, well, I go to school. And that man laid into him. I've never seen anything like that. And I was so grateful. And it was a real eye opener for me. He said, I work with men every day who go to school full time and work full time so their wives can raise their children. Your wife is working two full time jobs and I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And it really started the wheels turning. And he said, let me see your grades. They better damn well be good grades.
He was like a father figure for you. He kind of stepped in
Totally,
as your dad in that moment.
totally was. And my ex was barely passing at the
Wow.
time. And so that man turned to me and he said, I'd given an ultimatum. I'd make it a really short one. And if he does not turn this around, get out because he's dead weight to you.
Wow.
And nobody ever said that to me before, but it really got me thinking. And the short version of a really long story is he was exactly right. There were no grades. In fact, I found out that my husband wasn't actually even registered for school. He was going to the classes. Yeah, yeah. So I left.
Wow.
But here's the thing about that. When you leave a bad situation, it doesn't mean you're automatically all better and
Mm-hmm.
that you're all of a sudden making good choices. That was not the case for me, and it's not for most people. So for me, I jumped out of that relationship and right into another one. And that's the relationship that you and I spoke about with the abusive husband who didn't allow me to leave the house without him. We were at a Pentecostal church, and no disrespect to Pentecostal Christians at all. This is just my situation. And he utilized that to his benefit and constantly was reminding me how the Bible says that wives are supposed to submit to their husbands. And it was my duty to do what he said, no matter what. And
Mm-hmm.
so I got sucked right into that, and I was miserable, and it was awful. Um, and I don't even know where to go from there. Like, just what would you like me to tell you? Because it's again, just this awful story. There was no physical abuse of me. When the abuse started getting physical with our children, that's when I left.
Hmm.
So because the church that we were at really honed in on, the husband is the head of the house, and the wife is his co-pilot, and God hates divorce. God hates divorce
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And there were always these stories of people coming in saying, my husband and he was an alcoholic for 22 years, and I just prayed and prayed and prayed through it, and all of a sudden, 22 years later, here we are, and everything's wonderful. I saw wives whose husbands had affairs, and I kept thinking, comparatively speaking, I've got it pretty easy. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, I think that's just part of what happens when you're in that abusive situation.
Yeah.
Always reasoning why you shouldn't leave,
Right.
why you need to stay, why if you leave, you're the bad person,
Mm-hmm.
you're a bad person, and toxic people really zoom in on that, and they exploit that. There's really no other word for it.
Hmm.
And that's what happened in my situation. I was not allowed to leave the house again unless I went with him, or if I was going to church, which we went to church 4 days a week, and and that's just how it was.
So you bring a child into this marriage from your previous marriage, and then do you three children from your previous marriage, okay? And then you ended up having another child with your new husband, is that correct? Two children. So you have a total of five children.
I have 5 babies, yes.
Okay. Oh, mama. Did I
Yeah,
mention you guys that were listening to this episode on Mother's Day? You better have a big cake waiting for you after this.
we're so distancing right now, but I will be getting all the messages and all the calls later. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So you have five beautiful babies. You're unfortunately in this horrible toxic relationship, and you're saying, okay, your husband won't let you leave the house except to only go to church. You do end up getting a job, however, of course, it's with his permission and his approval.
Yes.
Walk me through this job that you get at Barnes and Noble.
So yeah, Barnes and Noble was a godsend for me. I again, hadn't been allowed to leave the house. My grocery shopping privileges had been removed. Um, just anything, but we were homeschooling our children, and by we I mean me,
Mm-hmm.
but we were doing it. And the only reason he let me do it was because A, it was close to our house and he could check up on me, and B, because I could get a bigger discount on our schooling supplies because I would get the employee discount on top of the teacher discount that I was getting already. And he did not like spending money. So, no disrespect to people who like to save. I'm all about that too.
Mm-hmm.
That was the method to his madness there. It was, I can keep an eye on her and we're going to get discounts on her stuff. So I was allowed to work there, but only if I could work only in the children's department. So that was the rule. And I would go to work at Barnes and Noble in my tea-length button-down denim dresses, and I would go read stories to babies and get a little breathing space and earn some money, what have you. And one of the funny things about Barnes and Noble is that they tend to be very high on LGBTQIA staff, which was something that was pretty foreign to me. Except at church, we were told, that's a big no, no, no. You don't do that, and you don't associate with people who do that. But again, my husband's logic was, we're saving money. It's fine. So as luck would have it, I met these wonderful people who did happen to be gay. The general manager at my store was uh, just a wonderful, kind man. Ooh, sorry.
It's okay.
Okay.
Take your
And
time.
my husband would come and he would spy on me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I did anything that was out of line, he would hold the kids up against me to make sure that I stayed in line the next time. And I never knew what I was doing that was wrong. So I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
even tell you what I was doing that was wrong. But anyway, I'm so sorry.
No, please. It's okay.
One day, the general manager came up to me and he said, that's not okay, right? And I didn't know. And he said, Kelley, we have to do something. This is not okay. And it's only a matter of time before he starts physically hurting you. And in my heart, I knew he was right, but I was also really afraid. Um, but anyway, long and short is that they started a bank account for me. My manager, my fellow employees, and they all contributed to it. And then they also worked out a plan for me so that I could cash my paychecks at work every week. And I would just take out like $5, $10, maybe $25 if it was a bigger check. And they would put it into this bank account for me. And it took a year and a half. But after that year and a half, I had enough money to get an apartment and to get out. And a lot of people think, when they think of abuse, they specifically think of physical abuse, which is certainly terrifying. But the damage that psychological abuse does to you is just, there are no words. There are no words. And it has these long-term effects that people don't even think about. So anyway, year and a half goes by. I have enough money. And they all got a U-Haul van when my husband was at work, and they came in and they helped me move to my new home. And as we were pulling out, he was pulling in, and he didn't really know it was us because we had already started driving down the street, but I'm sure he figured it out very quickly when he came in and saw that the house was half empty. Um, and but we got out, and it was amazing. Um, but he still, I mean, I had to go through divorce, and I had to go through custody hearings and all of those things. Um, and and he told my church that I was having an affair, which I wasn't. And it was just, I was ostracized by the only, I'd been separated from my own family, and the church had become my family. And then when my husband went and told them that I was having affairs, just nobody questioned it. Everybody just assumed he must be right because he's the man of the house and he said so. Um, and then I was shunned by my church, by the only people I knew besides my Barnes and Noble, coworkers. It was pretty awful. But I'd made up my mind there was nothing in the world that was going to make me go back to that, and that was it. And so we were kind of re-establishing ourselves. My kids, who I'd been homeschooling, now had to go to public school, which was fine. And everybody was doing pretty well. And at this point, I was living in downstate Illinois, which is quite different from Chicago, which is, I claim Chicago as home. I came here when I was 5 years old, and I'm back here now, and I've been here for, a long time now. But I had decided it was time to come home, and I felt like my kids needed to get a more diverse experience of what the world's really like, as opposed to, this church life that they lived. And at this point, my three children from my first marriage were older. The youngest of the three was 16. My oldest was 22, and so they had decided when I was moving back that they were going to stay, and that was fine. They had one more year of high school. They were okay. And so they stayed in Bloomington, and I moved back home. And when I sent for my daughters, my ex-husband had left, and wasn't answering his phone, and I didn't know where anybody was. And turns out that he had kidnapped them and taken them out of state.
Hmm.
So
Terrifying.
it was beyond terrifying. And there was a lot that led up to that, him begging me to come home, bribing me to come home. When, I had taken our car, he had said, I can call the police and tell them that you stole the car because the car's in my name. Lots of things like that, just scaring me all the way. I had gone out of town one weekend when he had the girls, and he called me. And this, again, going back to the early 2000s, and cell phones weren't then what they are now.
Mm-hmm.
You had to turn them off and charge them overnight, and all of this. And so I had gone to bed one night when I was out of town, and qualifier here too. This is the first time I'd gone out of town in 12 years, maybe. It was a long time, and I hadn't gone far, and I was only gone for 2 nights. And I woke up the next morning after I turned my phone back on again, and I had 15 voice messages, which is, I'm lucky if I get one usually.
Mm-hmm.
So it turns out that it was my husband calling me over and over and over again, and telling me that our daughter had died. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And I called him in a panic. I'm just like,
Did he
what
say, like, did he try to make up some type of story as to what happened?
No. So that's the weird thing. He kept saying, and he kept saying our daughter's name, and I can't believe this happened, and oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, and that's all he was saying. It's just stuff to scare me. And so I called him the next day, like first thing, as soon as I turned my phone on, and I said, "What happened?" But yeah, I'm like
Of
hyperventilating
course.
practically. And he said, "Oh, you didn't get my last message. She's fine. I just wanted to scare you and let you know what it feels like." Yeah, it was awful. It was awful.
Something that
And
you told me on our first call that we had before this is you called your ex-husband an
Mm,
extreme psychological abuser. That's
yes,
exactly what he is.
absolutely. And he still is to this day, but he doesn't have any power over me anymore.
Mm,
Uh, so, he still tries with other people, but he's actually afraid of me now because
mm,
I'm on to him.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's pretty classic psychological abuser, stuff. But yeah, no, just my whole marriage was that way. And then when I left, it was even worse. And it was relentless. So anyway, going back to what I was saying, he had kidnapped our daughters and took them out of state. And I went to the police, and the police in Bloomington, where they lived, said, "You don't live here. You need to start with the police where you live." So I went to the police where I live, and they said, "It's not our jurisdiction. You have to go to the police there."
Mm.
So I went back to the police in their town, and they said, "Wait, they're with their father? What's the problem?" And it just back and forth, and finally, and I had no idea what was going on. And then finally, I guess a week later, I was served papers. He had gotten an attorney, and he wanted to change custody. Uh, and I knew why he was doing it, but you can't tell a court of law that it's because he doesn't want to pay child support. He just can't stand the thought of paying this money. And another qualifier, I think a lot of times there's this misconception that this only happens with uh, lower income, uneducated people. And that is not true. My ex husband is a computer programmer at one of the largest companies in the United States.
Mm.
Um, Educated, we lived in a nice house in a nice subdivision on a lake, all the things. We owned
Mm.
an airplane. We had all the things. Yeah, but there was just this abuse that was going on that was just unreal. Um,
Thank you for
and
saying that because I think it is such a huge misconception. When we think
absolutely,
about abuse, physical, mental, whatever it is, we think of the circumstance. Oh, they're just in a really bad circumstance. And that wasn't the case for you.
no, we had everything, 5 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, 2 family rooms, all the things we had. There was no reason for it.
Hmm.
Uh, but he just had things that are still his demons to this day, you know. But so anyway, so I get served these papers, and I am now, we've gone through the divorce. I'm skipping a lot of details, and I apologize for that. Um, but we'd gone through our divorce. I had gotten custody of the children, and anyway, he wanted to reverse custody because he did not want to pay child support. So I had no money. It was 2008. The recession was upon us. When I had returned to Chicago, I had returned for a very nice job. Um, 2 months after I'd gotten this job, this was December 2007, I was told that I was not in the budget for 2008. And that was the recession back then. And excuse me, my there was a hiring freeze in my field. So there was nowhere to go, nothing to do. And there were not stimulus packages for unemployed people. And there were a lot of people who were losing their jobs left and right. And I couldn't even get a job waiting tables.
Hmm.
So to have the money to pay for an attorney to fight my ex-husband was just where? No, nothing. And then on top of it, I think I told you also my sister who lived in Texas was also dying of breast cancer. I mean, there was just nothing. There was no money. It was just like this trifecta of bad that was just showering down. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know where to turn. I ended up losing custody of my daughters. I talked to them beforehand and said, I could fight, but I'm probably not going to win, or I could stop spending what little money I have trying to fight this in court, and we could just give him what he wants, and we can just maximize our time together. And we had a lot of tears, but that was the choice we made. And so my daughters would call me, and we'd Skype and do homework over Skype. And whenever they would come and visit, we would just go do all kinds of fun, free things.
Mm-hmm.
And we just made the most of all of our time. And my youngest daughter ended up developing trichotillomania mania, which is hair pulling.
Okay.
And so she was just completely bald on the top of her head, no eyelashes, no eyebrows, just from stress pulling.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to just hold her little face. Here I go again. And I would always tell her, we have to go through the hard thing to get to the good thing.
Yeah.
She was 9 years old. Well, she's 23 now, and she's happily married to a guy who adores her. And we went through the hard thing and we got to the good thing. So here we
Absolutely.
are.
Absolutely. It really it makes it all kind of worthwhile in a weird way.
In a weird way, it does. I mean, I hate that I went through any of this.
Yeah.
I hate that anybody ever has to go through any of this, but it grew me in ways I never would have imagined.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, wow, thank you so much, first of all, for being so vulnerable and so raw with us.
Whew.
It's a really hard thing to talk about. I mean, it's been years, but clearly it still impacts you. How can it not? It's so
I think forever
powerful.
it will. It just will.
Yeah.
And thinking about how things like that hurt other people every day, just it's why I do what I do.
Hmm.
It is the driving force behind what I do. So,
Before I get to that part, I do want to talk about another hard part of your life. So
uh,
you get a divorce from your abusive husband and you lose your job in the recession of 2008 and you're
good.
living in Chicago and you have no income coming in. What happens, Kelley?
Well, I couldn't keep up with my rent, obviously. Excuse me. I did get unemployment insurance for a short while. Well, no, it was a pretty good time actually, but it wasn't a lot of money. There just wasn't a lot of money to be had, and it was what it was. But it was enough to do some things, but it certainly was not enough to pay all my rent.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up losing my apartment. I didn't have a car. I didn't have anywhere to go. I don't have family here anymore. Everybody's long gone, and I was just horrified that this was happening because I grew up in a pretty nice lifestyle, and this level of failure in my head anyway was just unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't tell anybody. So I ended up losing everything. The secretary at the apartment company's office called me one day and said, "Get everything you can and get out. They're coming tomorrow to lock you out." So at least I had a little warning, and I packed up 2 suitcases. And I think I told you one was with clothes and one had a few things that really mattered to me, including this super old, rickety laptop computer that ended up being kind of a godsend. And I had a friend who could not let me live with her, um, but I was able to have my mail sent to her place. There just wasn't room in their place. It just, I get it. It's fine. Um, but anyway, so I would get my unemployment check sent to her place, and then I would go pick them up, and then I would schlep my things. I don't even know how many miles on the bus to a Walmart where I could go cash my checks. But it was a hike, and every week I would go do that, and I can't remember, every week, every other, something like that. But I would have a little cash, not enough to rent an apartment, but enough to eat, which is a privilege that a lot of homeless people don't have, and a few other things as well. And so I would go to this bakery in Chicago. It's called Alliance Bakery on Division in a neighborhood called Wicker Park. And I would park my suitcases and I would go in and get a coffee and a pastry. And it was the only place that I knew of at the time where you got free Wi-Fi if you bought something. So that, and again, we're talking 2009. The world's very different now than it was 11 years ago, as far as the internet goes. And so anyway, I would get my things and I would sit down and I would have a pastry and I would pretend that I wasn't homeless for a while. And I went on Facebook one day and I had a very good friend who had written a letter to the recession. And her letter had said, "Dear recession, nothing personal, but you suck and I reject you." And I was very angry when I saw that. And I thought, you can't do that. How flip? How can you be so insensitive?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I said to my friend. And she, not knowing my circumstances, had said to me, "Kelley, look around you. Are people still working? Is money still being printed every day? Are people still driving in BMWs and Mercedes and Lexuses?" And then she said, "Look at the high rises around you. Are people still living in the penthouses?" And I was so mad I didn't want to even look at her. And angrily got off my Facebook and tromped on out of there. And it happened to be late afternoon, kind of getting to be about sunset. And the lights in the city were coming on. And I'll be darned if I did not look out. And there was a high rise, just down the street. And there were lights on at the top of that high rise. And there were people walking. You could see them. And I thought, dang it, she's right. Dang it. And there's still people driving around in nice cars. And then I started looking at other penthouses around me and seeing people living in them. And I thought, what if she's right? What if she's really, really right? And then I started thinking, well, what do those people have that I don't have? Besides money, obviously. And the answer I came up with was nothing. There's no reason in the world why I shouldn't have that too. That's literally what I thought. And so then my next question was, well, how do I get my hands on a piece of that pie? Because I deserve a piece of that pie too. And that's when everything changed.
And I think it's really ironic that this next path of your life that really started the Kelley conversion, as you call it, which I love, it really started with something that your ex-husband told you out of spite.
Yes, I didn't even mention that.
Yes, your husband said something to you, and why don't you share that with us? Because that really, even though he said it out of spite, you use that as inspiration to start your life over.
I did. So my ex said to me when we were going through all of this, before I'd left, he'd said, "You'll never leave me. You're too stupid. The only thing you're good at is cleaning house and raising babies." Mm. So it hurt at the time, but I've certainly parlayed that into a lovely little empire now.
Absolutely.
All I'm good at is raising babies and taking care of houses. So, so yes.
Yeah, so you use that and you're like, I should be a nanny. That's the light bulb moment that goes off in your head. And you're like, if my husband says I'm good at this, well, I'll be damn.
I'll go do that.
I'm going to go do that. But
that's right.
Of course, you have to get a roof over your head first, right? You were focusing at that time on the basics. I need a roof. I need a place to shower. And then I can start applying to jobs.
Right. So I knew I couldn't afford an apartment myself, and I didn't really have enough money to rent a room in an apartment. But I went on to Craigslist and I found these, and this is relevant to something that we'll touch on in a minute. But I found these college students at Columbia, and they were willing to let me rent their couch, which, as a 40-something woman, a little part of me just kind of died inside. Another part of me was like, this is a mean to an end. And my thing that I need to focus on right now is getting a roof over my head so I can get a good night's sleep. I need to have access to a shower, and I need to have access to a washing machine so I can wash my clothes, change my clothes, and go on interviews rested with clean clothes on. Oh, and a clean body. So that was what I did. And it took a while to find the first family, and they did not pay very much at all, like less than minimum wage. But it was a start. Backtrack. I was trying to go through nanny agencies, and I kept getting told no, 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 no. And their reasoning was, you might be a mom of 5, but you've never been a nanny before. And I wasn't willing to lie about that. And what they had said was, being a nanny is very different from being a mom, which sure, but also I would probably love to have a good mom be my kid's nanny. Put that out there. But not saying that there aren't wonderful nannies who've never, birthed children. But I don't think that I was any less capable just because I was a mom. But for whatever reason, every nanny agency I went through said, no, you have to be a nanny for 2 years before we'll even talk to you. So again, my logic was, well, I'm getting unemployment. This pay is less than, it was half of minimum wage, actually. But it's money, and more important, it's experience. And I wasn't willing to lie about any of that stuff. So I did my 2 years. And after 2 years, things changed dramatically. And one of the things that I realized early on, I think I told you this, is that I'm a really great nanny, but that's not what I'm here for. I am here to mentor moms and women in general, but especially moms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I found myself doing. Even, I can change diapers and I can feed babies and I can love on babies and I can keep babies healthy and happy and thriving while also chatting with their mommies about what's going on in their lives and their stressors and things like that. And the families that I ended up working for over the years all were saying the same thing. You need to teach people how to do this. You need to focus on your talents. I don't think you know what your talents really are. It's great that you're good with babies, and you're phenomenal. But here's the value that you really bring to our lives. And so I started really looking at that as my salary was going up and up and up and up. And so when I first started doing this, I was just making barely over $3 an hour, just nannying. I am now making six figures.
It's amazing. Say it, girl. Own it.
I now make six figures and I still love on babies, but my main focus is helping mommies feel like they're not losing their minds
Yeah.
while they're trying to be all the things to everyone all the time. And I'm really, really good at it.
Oh, yeah.
And I only work with one client at a time. And the one that I'm working with now, we laugh about it because people try to poach me from her constantly.
Yeah.
And I'm not going anywhere.
Not at
Not
all.
until this journey ends. No, I mean, so that's my thing. Whenever we transition to a new stage, when everybody's ready, that's when I move on to my next client. Kind of like Mary Poppins in a way,
Mm-hmm.
only more like a mommy Mary Poppins
Yeah.
than a baby one. And that's what I do now. And I'm so grateful for everything, in spite of all the tears and the fact that it still makes me cry when I talk about it. I'm so grateful for those experiences because they are what brought me to where I am now. And I am fierce.
You
And
are.
thank you. And and tears don't mean weakness. Tears mean vulnerability. And vulnerability is it's what makes us strong. So
Mm-hmm.
anybody who tells you that your tears are because you're weak, don't listen to them. They're full of it and they don't have any idea what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I will cry when I'm 90 when I tell this story, and that's fine. And
It's a
I'm
beautiful
still
thing.
fierce.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Um, Something I briefly mentioned was you like to say the conversion of Kelley.
Do.
Who was the Kelley before the hard stuff and who is the Kelley after the hard stuff?
Oh man. So the Kelley, some things are still the same. I've always wanted to do well and I've always wanted to do good. Um, that part of me is still the same. I'm still fun. I'm still happy. I still try to find the good things in life. Those are all just part of my DNA. What has changed dramatically is I don't know if I could say this word, but I'm a
Say it.
bitch.
Yes.
I, nobody can pull anything off on me ever again. It's so
Mm-hmm.
funny to me. My ex-husband is terrified of me. I kill him with kindness. Our youngest daughter got married last October, and I was the photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And he and his wife are just two of the most spiteful, ugly people I know. And I just took all kinds of beautiful photos of them. I did not play the nasty card. I was ever
Good
the
for
pro.
you.
Yeah, and I think they were just scared out of their minds because I can't be bothered. I got better things to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and that's really that confidence that comes from a looking back at what's happened in truth, not denying any of it, being very open about it, and then B, parlaying that into a strength.
Mm-hmm.
Those are game changers for me. And that's what I tell anybody, no matter what you've been through, you can turn it around. We don't need to get into it today, but I mean, I told you I was a victim of sexual abuse as a child. Anything that you have had in front of you, you can overcome it. As long as there's breath in your body, you can overcome it. That's all there is to it.
I love
You
what
just
you
have,
said about converting it to strength. And I want to say, I A lot of the time I say, and I tell people, everything happens for a reason. Like, heck, I remind myself of that too. But I'm hesitant to say that because you have been through such hard stuff. And I feel like, in a way, that saying kind of mutes the severity of what you've been through. But if you agree with that, do you feel that this happened for a reason? And if so, what was that reason?
100% yes. And when I was in a weaker position, I wouldn't say weaker position, when I was in uh, when I was still afraid, saying something like that would have made me very angry and
Mm-hmm.
very sad, you know.
Yeah.
But now that I'm on the other side of it, absolutely, because it grew me. It grew me in ways that I don't think I ever would have grown had I not walked through that valley or those valleys.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I get that now. My wish would be for everybody to get to the other side by jumping over it instead of having to walk through it.
Yeah.
But if we have to walk through it to get there, then walk your walk, man.
Who would
Absolutely.
who would you say to someone who is walking that walk right now, who is hit rock bottom?
What would I
They What would you say to them to just encourage them that there is growth and light on the other side of the tunnel?
I would say, I'm not going to carry you through this, but I will walk with you shoulder to shoulder. You are not alone. And if you just keep going, even when you don't want to, just keep going, you will get to the other side.
Absolutely. You're living proof of that, Kelley.
And I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one. There's so many of us out there.
Yeah.
And we want to support anybody who's going through this. We just want you to know you're not alone and you will get to the other side. Just keep going. Even when you don't want to, keep going and you'll get there. Promise.
I love that. Kelley, what does the future hold for you?
Oh, fabulous thing.
Of course.
I am now, it's just so crazy. I now have a passport. Now, of course, we're all on, shutdown right now, but I travel around the world and I meet people from every corner of the planet. And I'm a person who loves to live life out loud, and that is what I do. And I've already found my joy. So for me, if life coasts on where it's at right now, I will be the happiest girl in the world.
Mm.
But I only see things going up from here. I am in the process of launching a self-care business called Vida de Joia. We're not launching right now. We're on hold because of COVID-19, but it's going to be all about teaching women how to really take care of themselves in their way, not my way, your way, and offering all kinds of options for making that happen. So that's where I'm going with my business. I've got all these little side hustles going on. I'm also a photographer, which is wonderful. I get to touch with families all the time. And then, of course, I have my wonderful, amazing client family. And we're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out to you, say hi, ask you a question?
The best ways to find me would be either on Instagram. I am Chicago Kelley, and Kelley is Kelley. Or you can find me I have a group on Facebook called Change the World with Kindness. And
Mm,
those are the places where you could best be able to reach me. And I'd love to talk with people.
that's awesome. My last question is a question I ask all of my guests
Sure.
is how do you cultivate curiosity in your life?
How do I cultivate it? Ugh. I was born ultra curious.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never really thought about it. But what do I do to satiate it or to grow it?
To
What do you
grow
want to
it,
know?
how do you stay curious every single day?
I always find something to laugh about. I find something to bring me to tears. They can be tears of joy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, every single day, I find that something to laugh about, something to cry about, something to bring out emotions that have nothing to do with me. Most of my life, most of my talking is all about me, 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 me. But turning my eyes outward and seeing the world and putting myself in somebody else's shoes, um, I think that's the biggest key to me when it comes to cultivating my curiosity. Um, Get out of self,
Mm-hmm.
try to see the world from somebody else's perspective, and you'd be amazed at what you can find.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Kelley. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. And happy Mother's Day, Mama.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful morning. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.